The 20th Century, Oil, Electricity, and the Modern Era by Braden Clark, Aidan Dolan, and Thomas Camilleri.
One of the materials used in the 20th century was refined oil. It was very efficient compared to many of the other fuel sources that were previously used. It was offered in a convenient liquid form, which made it able to be used in many more versatile ways. It played an essential role in the development of automobiles and aircrafts. It replaced the coal-driven steam engine with a more fuel-efficient and powerful engine. It was also used to heat houses in a much more convenient and efficient fashion, and played an essential role in the development of the modern era. Electricity was another very important invention made in the 20th century. It was first introduced in the 1920s in France and was very difficult to implement in an efficient way. It was very expensive to test, and at first many people were hesitant to even try it. Electricity must be carried through cables, and the early cables wasted much of the electricity because of high resistance. By the 1920s, new cables were implemented, resulting in less energy being wasted. In Britain, in 1929, only 16% of the energy being produced was used in an effective way, but by 1939, 84% of the energy being produced in Britain was being used in a productive and efficient way. Another very important material introduced in the 20th century was steel. It was primarily used in larger buildings and used as a framing material. It was used for its structural strength and ability to hold its shape. It was also used for its unique and modern appearance. It was often paired with the use of concrete. The United States was the largest producer of steel beginning in 1901. Steel played an essential role in building very large buildings and is still used heavily today. Another material that was very important in the 20th century was concrete. It played an enormous role in the architecture in the modern era. It was used on virtually every building since the beginning of the modern era and was typically used as a foundation with steel framing placed above it. Reinforced concrete mixed both concrete and steel, with steel bars being placed inside of the concrete that was being poured. This added strength and durability. Reinforced concrete was used whenever concrete was used as a siding material. Concrete consumption in the 1900s was 3 million tons, but by the year 1928, that number rose to over 30 million tons. Glass was yet another material introduced in the 20th century. It was primarily used as windows for buildings, and with the new fuel sources, glass began to be easier, cheaper, and more efficient to produce in large quantities. Glass played an essential role in the style of architecture portrayed in the modern era. While primarily used as a window, it was also used for the aesthetic it brought to the exterior of the buildings. Many architects experimented with the use of glass as walls for a building, as it brought a very modern appearance.
The modern era. This was an era in architecture that began around 1900. It was an era that was very heavy on the idea of experimentation and attempting things that had never been done before. It had a strong emphasis on pushing past the old standards of architecture and introducing intriguing yet fully functional designs. And you can see two of these designs located on the right of the slide. The idea that industrial objects can be used as art and effectively used on the design of a building was often used. Each building was seen as a machine that had to fulfill its purpose with maximum efficiency. Introduced new materials, ideas, and methods of constructing new buildings was also used. Le Corbusier was a famous French architect. He started a movement called Purism, and he also designed the Villa Savoye, along with many more impactful historical structures. He also wrote the New Spirit magazine, and in this magazine he showed the everyday image of the industrial age. He showed what the world would look like now from an industrial perspective. He included ripped sheets from magazines and newspapers, as well as used publicity brochures, advertisements, and more to get the idea on what the world looked like in that day. He also wrote the book Towards a New Architecture, and one quote from him states, "It is the question of building which lies at the root of the social unrest of today, architecture and revolution." The 5 points for a new architecture. These points were written by Le Corbusier, which we talked about on the previous slide. His first point is pilotis, which are a set of posts that raises buildings from the ground. For number 2 is the roof garden. This allows to use the roof space to benefit the building, such as heating, cooling, and ventilation. Number 3 is a free plan, which allows spatial flow with non-structural walls. Number 4, horizontal window, which allows for film on windows that is meant to help regulate natural light in the building. And lastly, number 5 is free facade, which is a type of structure that doesn't need masonry walls on the outside of the building. One of the buildings designed by Le Corbusier was the Villa Savoye. It was built in Poissy, France in 1931, and embodied all 5 of his points for new architecture. The design took into account functionality of everyday life, and the building was kept clean without as much intense detail as there was in earlier years of architecture. An example of this is when, if you look at the railings in the picture to the left, they were designed to look like they were floating, and they involved little to no rails as possible.
Usonian houses, designed by Frank Lloyd Wright. He used native materials from the area and included flat roofs. He designed large overhangs for solar heating and natural cooling. He placed windows in certain places to allow natural light to come in. He had radiant floor heating, designed by Japanese architecture, and it was mainly for middle-class clients. He also wrote the book, The Japanese Print. Lingotto was designed by a man named Giacomo Mattei Trucco in 1916 in Turin, Italy. It was built by a car factory for the Fiat automobile company. It was designed with the idea that the building is a machine that must efficiently fulfill its purpose. It has 5 floors, and with each floor, the production of the automobile would near production as it neared the top. At the top, there was a track that was used as a test track for each automobile that was produced. The track led to the bottom of the factory. Wrap up. Developments in oil, electricity, steel, concrete, and glass all played a part in creating this modern era. These materials are used in almost every building that is standing today. The architects Le Corbusier and Frank Lloyd Wright helped allow architects to learn and design better buildings. Without these developments and people, the world wouldn't be at where it is today.